Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and you are listening to the third ever episode of Astrologers in Profile. This is a new series that I'm doing, and the purpose of the show is to highlight some of the personal stories of professional astrologers. I am a storyteller, I have a background in creative writing and storytelling, and I feel like one of the things that's not always covered in astrology is a lot of theory and technique, and we have a lot of classes you can take, but we don't always take time to hear about the stories of how astrologers came to be astrologers. So that's really the purpose of the show, is to hear and learn more about the stories of astrologers. So each new episode, I'm interviewing an astrologer that I know or whose work I admire, who has a very interesting story or something like that, and we're trying to uncover something of the personal journey that led each astrologer to astrology. So I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Mark Flaherty, to the show today. Mark, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Adam. Good to be here.
I met Mark, I think, was it back in 2003 or 4 in Peru?
It would have been around there. 2004 was when I was first there. So
yeah. It was a while ago, and we were both in the Amazon, and that's going to play a part in the story that we're going to talk about today for sure. But Mark's a professional astrologer from the UK. Where exactly are you from, or where exactly do you live and practice, Mark?
Right now I live in Devon, which is down in the southwest of England. Countryside, very beautiful part of the world. Lots of hills and beaches and rain.
Right. Nice. And is that where did you grow up there, or?
No, I grew up just outside of Birmingham, which is right in the middle of England, the second city after London.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I typically I would, read your bio and go through it all a little bit from your website and stuff like that. But I thought Mark's story is so interesting. I was so excited to have you on the show because hands down, you have, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating healing journeys that was a part of how you came to astrology. So I figured rather than going into any formal bio, we'd just dive right into your story a little bit. Sure. But let's start off. Like, were you into astrology as a kid? Were you raised in a religious environment? Like, what was it like?
No, I was raised in a very non-religious environment, and I wasn't into astrology at all. I thought it was complete nonsense. I have this weird kind of dual nature, I think. I'm a total skeptic about everything. I always was, but I was always fascinated with what's beyond at the same time. And so I completely didn't believe in anything other than this 3D material world. Yet I was always curious and always interested and reading about, ghosts and the paranormal and whatever, but didn't believe it at the same time.
Uh-huh. And so did you grow up in a family that was no like Orthodox religion? There was no like major, like you must go to church. So you didn't come up with like, so there was no like anti-astrology in your background. Some people have that as astrologers they have to contend with.
No, not at all. No, it was just, no religion, no church.
Would you say your parents had the same kind of skeptical, rational worldview as yourself, or?
Yeah, my dad definitely, and my mom also, but my mom also has this kind of, I think, a similar nature, a doubt, but a fascination with possibilities of something else.
Some attraction was there. Do you, when you look at your own birth chart, if you're open to sharing, do you see anything that would signify the fascination or the pull to astrology in particular?
Yeah, I mean, so my very logical, analytical, skeptical nature is all a Virgo in my chart. Virgo sun, Virgo rising. I have a very prominent Jupiter in Pisces, right on the descendant.
Okay.
Ruler of my North Node, and Neptune conjunct my North Node as well.
Right.
There's certainly this fascination with the other there.
Interesting. And so how does astrology, or were there some things that led you toward astrology? Your curiosity started taking you in a certain direction that it would eventually go somewhere toward astrology?
I guess so. I mean, it kind of came out of the blue very suddenly for me. But, it was my experiences with ayahuasca. I lived in the Amazon for many years, and that's really what kind of broke things open for me in terms of an experiential recognition of something beyond this,
Okay, so
the normal world.
let's go into how you got to Peru. Let's start at that part of the story. So, but people may not know exactly what ayahuasca is, and but before we even get to that, let's just say, how did you get to ayahuasca in the jungle in the in the first place?
So, back in 2004, I was working as a computer programmer in London, a very, very Virgoan job.
Right.
And basically, I mean, I'd always had this kind of dissatisfaction with normal life, just this sense of there's got to be something else going on. This can't be it. This kind of normal, go to work, just the sort of traditional life.
Mm-hmm.
As
Right.
I say, I totally doubted there was anything else, but something in me was like, there has to be. This can't be it. I'm not buying that. And so I didn't really know what else to do, but I knew I had to do something. My life wasn't working, and so I quit my job and basically spent 12 months traveling through Latin America. Had never heard of ayahuasca when I left England, but quite a long way into that year, I ended up in Cusco in Peru, where an old school friend was living, and he told me about ayahuasca, and immediately something in me was like, I need to do this. Something really called to me. Then it was really about partly to do with some physical issues that I had going on that no doubt we'll get into, and also just a sense, like, he told me this story about his girlfriend and this amazing healing she'd had on a physical level with it, but also talked about how it can really help with emotional issues. I was very shut down at that point, just not really very happy with life, and I guess, just kind of desperate for something, some new dimension to my life, something to bring some meaning to things, to try and I was seeking. I didn't know what I was seeking, but I was seeking something, and
Right.
this seemed like a good way to explore that.
Well, let's define. I mean, I could easily do it, but I'd prefer in your own words, maybe you explain to people who are hearing about ayahuasca for the first time, like, what is ayahuasca? Someone tells you that there's this thing called ayahuasca in the Amazon, so you go to check it out. But what is it?
Yeah, so it is a sacred plant medicine that is used traditionally in the jungle, has been used for a long time. It's a form of healing, but essentially it is a, what would you say, a psychoactive experience held in a ceremonial context to really open you up and take you into the spirit world, with the idea being that the medicine spirits that the shamans work with enable and facilitate healing on a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual level.
And so, upon hearing the story from someone that you met while traveling in South America, you thought, I might as well go check this out.
Yeah, it was this instant pull, and since then, over the years, I've had a number of experiences where it kind of really bypassed my very strong analytical mind, and there was just a knowing
Mhm.
this is something I
Yeah,
need to do.
I have to do this. Yeah. I'll never forget my best buddy growing up, Nick, who you met in Peru as
Mm.
well. Um, we were, I don't remember. We were doing recreational psychedelics at home, kind of experimenting with similar realms and stuff like that. And then we had read somewhere about ayahuasca and a traditional context and container for this kind of this spirit world work. And I remember Nick having the same reaction. I have to go. I have to do this. It terrified me. And at first I was like, yeah, you go do that, And then he was like, you should come with. And then I was like, I thought about it. And then the same thing ended up gripping me. Like, I have to go do this with my friend. And so, but it's funny how, and all three of us, actually, something we'll maybe talk about later, all three of us ended up doing astrology too, in a sense, coming through one of the shamans that we met there.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, the more of that to come. But so you, at this point, a big part of the story that we're going to be getting into is, of course, that there was an enormous period of healing on all levels, but also very physical healing that you went through for a long period of time, living for many years in the jungle to try and address some problems that you were having. Were those already there when you went for the very first time?
Yeah. So, and I guess this was the primary reason for ayahuasca for me feeling called to it, was the physical stuff. So I'd had throughout my life eczema, a skin condition, and from a very young age, almost from birth, it was very severe, and it had mostly gone away in sort of adolescence and in my 20s, but in my late 20s, it came back, and over the course of about 2 years, it got progressively very severe to the point that it could cover my entire body just out of nowhere within a day or two. And I would use steroid cream, and it would suppress it, but over that time that started to get less and less effective. It would stay for longer in more parts of my body, and so that was really the primary drive to explore ayahuasca. What actually happened was, after my first week in the jungle, kind of the opposite of what I was looking for really happened. It was actually the trigger for it to get extremely severe. After that, I kind of survived the first week there, which was the most terrifying experience of my life. And I was like, thank God that was worth it. But, I'm never doing that again.
Right.
But then I went home, and actually within a space of a few weeks or a month, the condition exploded to the point where basically I spent the next year pretty much in bed, unable to move. I was kind of bright red from head to toe. Pretty much all my skin fell off. And, I just lived in absolute agony, every minute of every day. Barely slept for a year. And ended up, I started with the Western medicine, but I just knew that I couldn't touch it, and it didn't help. And so, my nature is to be skeptical of everything, but I started exploring different alternative treatments because I had no choice. And so I did a lot of things, primarily acupuncture and Chinese herbs, and nothing really helped. And something within me just kept saying, ayahuasca can help, ayahuasca can help. And I kept resisting it because I was like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
Until, really I reached this point of desperation, and I thought, okay, I'll go. Maybe it'll take a few weeks. Maybe it'll take a couple of months. It'll be worth it. And, little did I know I would spend much of the next 13 years of my life in the jungle.
Right. Yeah. So you eventually you say you get to a point where, and I actually remember when I first met you in the jungle, you looked as you described, red from head to toe. You were peeling. I mean, it looked like there were sores. I mean, it was like, I really felt for you. And I remember like, there was this, because you had been there for a while, like, kind of working on this, the skin condition. And obviously you were getting multiple other benefits, but I remember that, there would be, every night in the ceremony, there would often be a time where it'd be like the shaman, the kind of facilitators of students of the shaman and so forth, would reach out like, how are you doing? And you would, a lot of times you'd just kind of groan, or you'd be like, I'm good, like, and it was just kind of like everybody knew that you've been there, kind of like, almost like infinitely, you've just been there doing this work, working on the same stuff, just miserable with your skin falling off. And I remember that. I mean, I remember that stage that you were at. It's remarkable to see you today and to see you're glowing. You look good. You look strong. I mean, it's totally amazing. So there was quite a turnaround that happened. How did that turnaround take place? Was it gradual? Could you feel it starting to address things in your body over time, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to say, one of the other things that was going on, it was a skin thing, but it was very internal. It was like there was this inferno, just such heat in my entire body. And it always felt to me very much rooted in my nervous system. I could feel something going on there. And so it was kind of like the skin was just
The
an
surface.
external manifestation of it. It was basically, I mean, there wasn't really a turnaround as such. It was just a very, very, very slow, gradual improvement. And, it would get better and it would get worse and it would get better and it would get worse. But it was, when it would get worse, it wouldn't be quite as bad. And then the better would be a bit better. But just very gradual. And, and to be honest, it's still not completely done now. It's basically turned into my teacher in life, this condition. And as frustrating as the whole process has been, it continues to kind of open up new dimensions of life to me. And so, I'm kind of at the point where there's like a recognition that until it's done teaching me everything it has to, it's not going to completely go away. And so, there's so many layers of teachings and lessons in it. And kind of the ultimate, the biggest one really for me, that it's kind of led to is basically acceptance of what is, like kind of like the ultimate teaching in life. And it's like ayahuasca was incredible. It took me so far in that journey, but eventually it reached a point where I just knew it was time to live my life in a different way. And it's not necessarily the case for ayahuasca per se, but my relationship with it had become, there's a problem that has to be fixed and I'm here to fix it, which, is a very Virgoan, I mean, that's Virgo is the problem solver,
Right.
It's like, let's fix this problem. And so eventually it took me to the point where that approach just does not work. It's brought me so far, but the ultimate teaching is to recognize there isn't really a problem. I might not like it, but so it's kind of flipping everything on its head currently, and I'm still going through this. It's like the deepest healing is in the allowing what is to be, and the approach of trying to heal for me was ultimately rooted in kind of like an internal war. There's something I don't like about myself. I want to get rid of it. And life in its strange beautiful, painful way was like, no,
Right.
no, that's not going to work.
It's remarkable because I have, of course, spent a long time drinking in different contexts, like you, and then have had friends, of course, that in different contexts over a long period of time. And I feel that at some point, many people that I've known have come to the same basic conclusion that um, there comes a point where maybe it's like you realize that you've been gifted so much from the experiences, the ceremonies, the medicine has given so much, and then it also gets to a point where it's like the bird has to fly on its own. It has to be pushed out of the nest, and we would have to go on living our life and incorporate the lessons that we've learned. Um, I've never heard anyone have any disdain for ayahuasca after a long period of time working with it, but
No,
there is some point where you reach and you say, now it's important to go and live the lessons that I've been given in some way.
absolutely. And also, what I realized for me, the pattern I created there was, you know, it was basically, you fix me, you heal me, I can't do it, and
Yeah, right.
and I don't know that that's true for everybody with ayahuasca, but it's a very easy trap to fall into, I think. And I was deep in that, and the recognition that continues to unfold is, no, this is my lesson. Only I can kind of get to the bottom of this. And
Mm.
things like ayahuasca can be a tremendous tool for that. But I was still coming from the place of, it needs to fix me, or the shaman needs to fix me.
Right. Yeah, it's in a weird way. I think because when I went down for the first time, I was just coming out of a period of basically just really reckless drug use and some opiate addiction and stuff like that, and a lot of emotional issues that came from growing up in the church and so forth. Uh, all of which I felt were addressed, and I was given many tools to work on. But there was also this sense of uh, it's a bit of a paradox, because ayahuasca facilitated in some ways this realization that I was trying to purge and eliminate something that actually is the most sacred part of what I am, and in some ways it cleared out a lot of cobwebs and gave me a lot of different healings and help and guidance. But then same thing. What I'm wondering, where you get to the place where you say, okay, I need to go and live my life and recognize that the life I'm living is the medicine, and the other question that I have for you, because I think this is also really interesting. I've talked to actually a number of friends and people about this who know astrology and have had ayahuasca experience. And the question is, was there a transit that either sent you in, or was part of, reflected the journey into ayahuasca or the journey out that you've recognized?
Absolutely. And big ones. So I first drank ayahuasca at my Saturn returns,
Okay, right.
when Pluto was square my sun.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that'll do it.
And it's interesting, actually, because, I end up doing a lot of astrology readings for people who have drunk ayahuasca. And I've noticed very commonly when people first come to ayahuasca, big Pluto transits going on.
Mhm.
That's a really common one. Um,
Definitely.
and the ending, and it came out of the blue, very fitting with the symbolism. It wasn't on my mind. I wasn't thinking about it. And suddenly there was this recognition, I need to stop drinking ayahuasca. Almost to the day of the first hit of my Uranus half return.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Uh, on the way um, in, it was Saturn on my sun. Was, and a lot of it was dealing with my father, stuff with my father,
Mm.
and then it was also it was, oh, I remember, it was Pluto opposite my natal Mercury, and
Okay.
there's a lot of, and also opposite my natal Mars, because they're Mars and Mercury are together in my chart. So, and
Mm.
I attributed a lot of that to just a tendency to be very mentally busy and to have a lot of fear mentally, the Mars Mercury. And
They're in Gemini or Cancer?
Gemini, Cancer, right at the end of Gemini, beginning of
Yeah.
Cancer.
Oh.
And so it was just the opposition was coming through, and over the course of the years of drinking, that was really the aspect that got sort of hammered on the most. And it felt like it addressed a lot of mental issues, especially. And
Mm.
then when I decided to sort of step away from regular participation, which for me, I don't know if we've ever connected about this, but for me, after the lodge in Peru that we were both at, I got really invested in the Santo Daime, which is a group from Brazil. It's a slightly
Right.
different setting, but I was involved with that for many years. And then I stepped away from that when Pluto conjoined my moon in the ninth house.
Hmm.
And it was a lot of family stuff that was coming up, but it was also that felt like a moment of, Capricorn moon in the ninth house, sort of recognizing this tendency to want to perfect everything, not quite like Virgo, but similar kind of that
Right.
slave driving mentality. So
Right.
anyway, it was beautiful because ayahuasca was the one who sort of pushed me out of the nest. I mean, I can't,
Yeah.
so yeah, but anyway, that's really, really cool. So going back to your story, for to kind of get to where astrology comes in. So you're
Mm.
doing this healing, you're in the jungle for how many years again were you in the jungle for?
I mean, it was over the course of 13 years. I probably spent in that time close to 50% of that in the jungle. So
Right.
about 6 years, probably.
Gosh, yeah. And for people who don't understand, like people who've never drank ayahuasca, you have to imagine on some levels, it's one of the most healing experiences you'll ever have. But a week in the jungle where you're drinking ayahuasca 3, 4, maybe 5 times, or 10 days in the jungle, it feels like the longest period of your life. I mean, I don't have one trip to South America where I stayed and drank, 3, 4 times where it didn't feel that way. Would you say that's pretty common, right, Mark?
Oh, absolutely. And, I went through that, at least for the first 6 years, 5, 6 years, it was like that every week. And,
Right.
I used to hate, I mean, I was miserable then anyway because of what I was going through, but there'd be like, I'd meet these people and at the end of the week, they'd be like, oh God, I can't wait to go home. It's been so long. And I'm just there like, yeah, whatever.
I'm going to be here another year. I mean, I remember having such admiration because I felt like you had a good sense of humor, and you were like, I was always excited to go down. I'm like, well, I know Mark's going to be there, like we get to hang out, and you always had a good sense of humor about it. And I thought if he could do it, then I could do it. So I think you probably inspired a lot of people too.
Thank you. I can't remember the last time I saw you there, but I do. This might have been the last time. I'm just remembering what I thought was a very funny moment. You probably dismissed it at the time, but I remember you saying to the shaman in the middle of ceremony, I'm really scared. I'm really scared. And he said to you, well, Adam, if I was in your position, I'd be really scared as well.
Yeah. Yep. So many classic. I remember when I was writing my book, it was like hard to choose from the most memorable moments, and there's so many of them, and the sense of humor that was maintained, and the loving care and guidance that was given. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have enough gratitude to ever give to the people down there who were helping me through those times, and other people too that I met along the way, and other traditions.
Yeah, I mean,
it's incredible.
yeah, for me, it's not an understatement to say I wouldn't be alive today without them. They literally saved my life. That was the mess I was in, and I mean the physical stuff. It literally took me to the brink of suicide. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm out. But life had other ideas. It turned out that wasn't an option.
Right. They're truly like, it's really hard to capture or quantify what the experiences are like. And yet I mean, this is an interesting question for you. There's I mean, not that I was like some pioneer or anything. Ayahuasca was there and people were there doing this for a long time, but I have noticed compared to when I first went down and first drank, the little lodge. I think you were at the little lodge up
Yeah.
river, yeah.
Mm.
And that the context of the little place that we started in with 5, 6 people in the ceremony was my first time, and then over the years seeing it grow and explode, and spending about 10 years for me drinking until I sort of walked away, pretty regular, not as regularly as you, but pretty somewhat regularly. I watched it grow, like exponentially, and was part of facilitating some of that growth through Reality Sandwich and the ayahuasca monologues and stuff like that. And I look back at that and I sometimes wonder how healthy or positive all of that was. I was really excited about it, really charismatic about it. I think a lot of people were, and now it's kind of an entity of its own. And sometimes I look at it now, I'm not sure if all of it is really, if there aren't some crossed wires here and there. What do you think about that?
It's a very good question. Likewise, I remember back then in the early days, hardly anyone that I knew had heard of it. And then in the last few years, I'm surprised if I meet somebody who hasn't heard of it.
Right. Yeah.
It's so well known now. I think it's one of those things that it's so powerful, but I think there's sometimes misunderstandings about ayahuasca that I totally had for a long time, that it alone is medicine and it alone can help change your life for the better, because so much depends on the context and the skill and training of the shaman. And, I think with the explosion of interest in it and the explosion of the number of centers, what happens is a lot of people who maybe don't really know what they're doing are leading ceremonies. And then, it has the potential and has caused big problems for people in their lives, so it's double-edged sword in that way.
I'm glad that I know a few places to refer people to. I feel thankful for that, because when people come to me because they know that I have had these experiences, I usually can give people places that I feel are safe and rooted in some traditional training and things like that. You've written a book about ayahuasca. You wrote a book about your journey, shedding the layers. That's, I have the right title, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I read the book and offered a little blurb for it when it came out, and it's a fantastic book. So we'll make sure we show people how they can read it. But it documents the whole healing journey. But you've had exposure as someone who's shared their story about ayahuasca publicly, and so probably people come to you and ask about ayahuasca and whether they should do it or not, or where to go. And how do you handle those kinds of things? Because I'm curious to hear from someone else, because I've kind of had my own way of dealing with it. But
yeah, I mean, the first thing to say, and I think maybe you were like this in the early days, it was like initially I felt like everyone should do this. This is like incredible. And then I kind of went the other way, and I certainly don't recommend it ever to people. But if somebody says, should I do it? I would say, I don't know.
right.
You figure it out. But if somebody,
Right.
I certainly wouldn't say, oh, absolutely, you need to do this. But if somebody says, I really want to do this, where to go, how to do it, then, the only places I can recommend are people that I've drunk with and I know are, safe, and they'll have an amazing, powerful, positive experience. I've no doubt there's a lot of other places that are equally good, but, my approach is, I can only say from experience, this is who I recommend. That's it, really. I would never say don't go somewhere else, but I would just say I can't tell you about those other places.
Yeah, that's basically the same approach that I've taken. Once in a while, someone will, an astrology client or someone will be talking about something that they're just exhausted trying to deal with, and they'll say like, I heard you drank ayahuasca or whatever. Would you recommend it? And similarly, I'll say, well, ayahuasca can be very, very helpful, but it's really personal. It's a personal
Mhm.
decision, and you kind of have to feel called to do it. And I can't guarantee what kind of experience he'll have. So I can tell you that the experiences that I've had and with the people that I feel are safe, and that's about it. So same basic idea. Um, I think that's really
I don't know,
important.
I don't know about you, but had I known what I was getting myself into, I would never have done
Right,
it.
right. Yeah, totally. It's remarkable that we kept going with it for such a long time. You especially. I mean, it's remarkable that you stuck with it. But I think this comes into another question that I want your opinion about, which is, um, do you feel we are as astrologers, we're practitioners of destiny in a sense. We're helping people understand their destiny path, and how the stars can be a source of guidance along the path of life. And do you have a sense that you know people are destined to drink ayahuasca, that's why it's hard to comment? Or do you feel, and I want to ask later about astrology too, if astrologers are destined to be astrologers, if there's any real sense in training and classes and marketing and all of that stuff. So we'll come to that later though. Are people destined to drink ayahuasca?
Oh, that's a big
Sorry, I know it's a big one.
um I don't know that I've figured out this destiny thing.
Good. Yeah, that's a good answer.
um I don't know. It's maybe not. In a way, like I quite like the approach that one of my teachers, Jeffrey Cornelius, takes. He has Company of Astrology in England, and he says destiny is negotiable.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if it's literally like that or not, but I think, okay, so this is how I see it, is like, I kind of see it like, regardless of whether or not things are destined to happen, we still have to live out our human journey as if we have free will. And I don't know really whether we do or not, but it's like we're living the experience of making decisions, and you could argue till the cows come home whether that was always going to happen or not. But I feel like, on the human journey, we have to play the game of making decisions. So on that level, and I feel like it's more empowering, like when I work with clients, I don't say anything's set in stone. It's like, these are the themes at play, these are the kind of possibilities, but what does this mean to you? What feels right? How are you going to express this? I feel like that's a more useful way of approaching destiny. I don't know what's actually true.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's so important. There's obviously I have was a part of, and I was in India last year at a conference. I gave a talk called "The Importance of Prediction in Astrology." Basically, one of the things that I've observed in like more modern forms of astrology is a sort of total aversion to the idea of destiny or fate or anything that sort of comes into your path outside of your own creative agency. And so, but obviously working in horary, which hopefully we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Working in horary, I've seen over and over again that there is a certain accurate predictive power in astrology to locate a missing object or to describe precisely how your boss is going to respond to your request for a raise, or
Right.
like. And so it's definitely a fine line though, because on the other hand, there's, I think that the same extreme exists in spiritual life, where you have some people who want to renounce everything in the world, or you have people who want to completely immerse themselves in the world, and this kinds of splits that are almost like false dichotomies, really. And So maybe there's something about the whole fate and free will dynamic that is just beyond our capacity to understand with our dualistic mind.
I think so. I mean, I spent a long time concerned with questions like that and trying to figure that
Right,
out.
right.
Um, I eventually gave up and kind of got to the point for myself where I didn't feel like it mattered whether or not something was destined to happen. It's like what matters is this moment, the person, their life, what they're doing. You know, I think the danger with sort of predeterminism or fatedness is people can sort of absolve responsibility for their lives. You
Sure.
know, so um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. So it remains a question mark as to whether or not people like your journey into this healing event, you're going to be hesitant to say, oh, that was my karma, that was destiny, I had no control over that, that was the gods just sending me on my way. You're not going to go so far as to say that, but it sounds like you're also not opposed to the idea that there was some trajectory that you were on, some combination of both, and showing up and being present for that journey was what the lesson that really came out of it, though.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I kind of feel like in hindsight, if I look at it, I'm going to contradict everything I just said. And it did feel quite fated and destined.
Right.
Um, you know, for example, I feel like I ended up meeting what I feel like is the only people on the planet who could really help me in the situation I was in, you know, in the middle of the Amazon jungle. That didn't feel like coincidence.
Right.
And it felt like I was led there.
Right. So there's some there. Yeah, I think it's important because one of the writing that middle space where there's some sense of guidance, there's some sense of higher intelligence that's guiding our lives, but that it's not like, as a parent, I think of it a lot like the way that that as a sort of higher intelligence for my daughter, I'm helping her cultivate her own autonomy and agency. It's like I step in, I help, I step back. You know, there's that kind of, and maybe in some ways our spirit guides, the universe, what have you, is working like that too. Who knows? But yes.
Yeah, I mean, for sure there are guiding forces. You know, it's not like just us, the person in our lives, doing everything. There is all kinds of other agencies and influences guiding us. And yeah, to what extent we have a say in that, I don't really know. But a good friend of mine who's also a shaman in Peru, he has a phrase that I love. He says, free will is our ability to delay the inevitable.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, that's a great quote. Yeah. So, okay. So you're in the Amazon for a long time doing this healing work. Where does astrology come in? I know it comes in during this period.
Yeah, I remember exactly when. It was April 2010. What was interesting, so it was one particular week that I was in the jungle. It was after, so I'd been living there for many years, and I'd left for a while, and I'd gone back at this point for the first time in about a year. And it was actually in that week I had my first ever pleasant ayahuasca ceremony. After I'd done over 200 ceremonies at that point, and they'd all been different shades of hell. And something really shifted that week. You know, it wasn't like I did anything. It was kind of like this recognition. I saw things differently, like all the darkness that I was fighting. I realized, I just knew, I saw that it didn't exist in the way that I thought it existed. And something really shifted, and suddenly I was having pleasant experiences. And during that same week, a friend of mine called Chris, who's an English guy who is an ayahuasca shaman, he was working at that center. He'd also been an astrologer for about 25 years. he just happened to give during the week of the retreat a 1-hour overview of astrology, just very basic, some technical stuff, and this is what it is. And he completely blew my mind in that hour. Something in me, I was just like, oh, that's what it is. Oh, and it made total sense the way he explained it, you know, because before that, I still really thought it was, you know, the newspaper horoscopes, Mystic Meg telling you you're going to fall in love with somebody you meet at the bus stop, you know.
Right.
And I was just hooked, and I went away from that, and like I immediately got some book recommendations from him. I was reading on the internet, and I spent the next few weeks just looking into astrology. And it was that quick within that time. Again, something in me just knew, way beyond my rational mind. It was like, this is my thing. This is my calling. I don't know what that means, but this is what I have to do. There was no doubt.
Right. And so there's another moment, one of those moments. I'm so curious about them. Not that I think we're going to solve anything, but those moments are so peculiar because there's a sense of calling, there's a sense of destiny, but there's also the call to respond, to do something about it. And that interaction is, again, right on the sort of line that we're trying to describe between destiny and agency and stuff like that. And I think astrologers, one of the things that I'm very passionate about, hopefully in the series, in doing, is trying to expose the moment where that call comes, and how there's also some inner response that's necessary, that we respond to the call on some level. And because if we understand that about astrologers and our stories, I think we stand to understand astrology itself a little bit better. So it's a kind of a weird idea, but does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like, this is what I'm going to do. It wasn't, I want to do this or I don't want to do it. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did want to do it as well. It reminds me of one of the other apprentices, an English girl that was at this center. A couple of years before this, I'd been going through all this fear about, oh my God, I've been drawn to the jungle because I'm going to have to become an ayahuasca shaman. And that was like my worst possible nightmare. It's like, no way I want to do that.
Right.
You know, she said to me, it's like, you would know if it was what you were called to do because you'd really want to do it. And she was like, when you find the thing that's right for you, you'll know and you'll want to do it. You'll just know. And I'd forgotten about that. And then a few years later, this happened. And I was like, yeah, it's, it did have the quality of destiny about it. There's no question. That was the experience of, this is what I need to do.
This is so interesting because the same gentleman, Chris Odell, he also gave my best friend, Nick, he gave him a book on sun signs. I think it was by Swami Kriyananda. And he told him, to check it out or whatever. And Nick passed that book along to me. And that was the book that opened me up to astrology. So both of our professional trajectories, as well as my buddy Nick, who is not a professional astrologer, but for who many years actually wrote professional horoscope columns as a side kind of gig, all three of us found that call on some level because of Chris and how compelling he was. But he was a professional astrologer for 25 years who also came from some pretty serious pedigree, being a longtime student of Jeffrey Cornelius, who's kind of a juggernaut in the modern astrology and the renaissance of traditional forms of astrology and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess Chris has got a lot to answer for.
Right? I know. So at any rate, I think that's fascinating. So
right.
you had this moment where it was a call. Did you start you're in the jungle. How did you start studying? How did you start getting into it? And was the medicine at all instrumental in bringing you along in your studies?
Well, at that point, I wasn't living in the jungle full time anymore, so I was coming and going. I was spending more time back in England than in the jungle by that point. So, um, you know, my studies were a little bit haphazard. So I did a little bit of stuff with Chris, and he gave me some book recommendations. So there's some self study, and then the first kind of sort of formal training I had was with. It was a correspondence course actually with a guy in America called Bob Mulligan, based down in Florida.
Okay.
So I did, I don't know, a couple of years, I think, of his correspondence course. And it was useful for the foundations, but then then Chris put me in touch with Jeffrey Cornelius, who, as you know, is a true maestro. I mean, the guy he's on another level. For
Totally.
me,
Yeah.
I mean, I might be biased, but I feel like he is the best astrologer, not just alive, but maybe for hundreds of years. Just,
Yeah.
the way he understands astrology and symbolism, it just really fitted with how I was now seeing the world. I just totally resonated with it.
There's been no single book in astrology that I've read that's influenced me more than The Moment of Astrology, which is his
Right.
seminal text. And just so that people have an idea, excuse me, Jeffrey Cornelius and the tell me the name of the lodge again. It's called the
His company?
yes, the Company of Astrologers.
The Company of Astrologers, yeah.
Right. The Company of Astrologers and Jeffrey were something that was really at the forefront of revitalizing horary astrology, which is a traditional sort of ancient form of divinatory astrology, of more like a tarot spread in a sense. And that form of astrology was sort of awakened due to his enthusiasm and good work and abilities, along with other people who were important, but in that process, but which in turn was part of a wave of awakening interest in classical astrology in the United States and Project Hindsight and Hellenistic astrology. But Jeffrey, I am in agreement with you, Mark. I think he is the book, The Moment of Astrology, is really a book about how astrology is not really what we think it is. A lot of times we think of astrology in really, really almost like it's an empirical science that just hasn't been recognized yet.
Exactly.
And I think, Jeffrey really returns it to this idea of it being about a spiritual form of communication, and that the ritual apparatus of astrology facilitates something that's a bit more spiritual than we'd like to admit, because we want to think of it as really, really objective so that it appears credible to others. But his book, really mind-blowing. So for those who are listening, take Mark's word, and our teacher, both of us who were exposed to astrology from Chris, his teacher for many, many years was Jeffrey. And then both Mark and I got exposed to Jeffrey through Chris. Jeffrey ended up coming to Nightlight, and I hosted him for a series of talks in New York City, and that was how I kind of met him and got exposed to his work. And you probably connected with him actually over there.
Yeah, so he's stopped doing them now, but him and his wife Maggie, who's I think you also met, is also an amazing astrologer. So I did some one-to-one sessions with Jeffrey, but they would also run a monthly meeting in London. So, I used to go up there for a few years, but for various reasons, they don't do those anymore, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. So it's cool to see how the threads are connected. So you were studying, and were you at all going back to drink after you started studying?
Yeah, I was, and I was until quite recently, last year. And one of the really cool things that started happening more recently, not when I first got into astrology, but in the last couple of years, um, I got a lot of teachings during the ceremonies. You know, I would be sitting there and not thinking about astrology, but you know, there'd be like people's charts who I was about to do a reading for, or I'd just done readings for, or some horrors. And it was almost like I was getting the downloads of understanding. And it was so fun. It was like, it was somehow things that I didn't understand just became so clear and obvious in the
it,
ceremony.
it's incredible the way that ayahuasca is able to do that. I mean, I remember being in New York City and working with the Santo Daime and drinking pretty regularly while absorbing a ton of like Liz Green and Richard Tarnas and evolutionary astrology, just kind of like taking in tons of different currents of astrology and going into ceremonies. And I felt like one of the things that the medicine was able to do for me, not with any intentionality either on my part, it was sort of peripheral that I was studying astrology at the time. Even though now I see how instrumental the medicine and the medicine path was in bringing me to astrology in a sense, but the ceremonies had a way of also separating static from signal. Like in a sense, when I read Jeffrey Cornelius's book, The Moment of Astrology, it was as though I had a theoretical framework for understanding how it was that the spiritual space of an ayahuasca ceremony would tell me, yeah, this is important in your chart, or this is what's happening, or this is how to think about that, but not this other thing. That's noise, but maybe pay attention to this, or something like that. Some other, the way of seeing charts. It wasn't like the medicine would sit down and be like, giving me an oration about Taurus or something, but just more like the visionary capacity to see a chart. Like I'm guessing the same thing could happen for a tarot practitioner. In fact, I'm confident that some of the people that we both know have probably had these experiences. Good, know people who drink ayahuasca who work with tarot as well. The medicine may teach you how to see the message or meaning of a spread in ways that you can't get from books.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just remembering one incident with, I was quite new to practicing horrors a few years ago, and somebody came and asked me a question just as we were sitting there about to go into ceremony. And so I was like, okay, check my watch, like any good astrologer, like note down the time. And through that week, I'd been sitting with this chart and I couldn't understand it at all. And then later in the week in ceremony, it was just obvious. Like I just saw what everything meant, how it fitted the situation. And, that affected not just that one reading, but after that, suddenly horror-y became a lot easier for me. Somehow, in a way I can't really describe, I was more connected to the symbols, and like horror is basically astrology as divination, astrology as ritual, as communing with spirits. And that's literally how I see all astrology and how I do my practice. It's more overt in horror-y, but it's, I think the reason ayahuasca helped me with this is because it is about, and especially for me as being very Virgoan, very analytical, which comes in handy for some of astrology and gets in the way sometimes as well. But it kind of opened me up to these other realms. It's almost like a channel of communication with the chart, with the spirits opened up somehow.
Right. And would you say, I mean, just, I think we'd probably both agree that in order to be a clear channel, or to be able to, again, separate static from signal, to be able to see or read in that way, the ayahuasca is not just giving you like some kind of magical gift. It's also happening as some channels of perception are being healed or cleansed, or there's some sense of needing to maintain the sanctity of the space of your mind and body as a reader that comes from these experiences. Would you say?
Absolutely. I sometimes feel like, the best readings are when I get out the way. It's like a channel. I mean, that has certain connotations to be a channel, but it's almost like being a vessel for, what would I say? It's like, I mean, it's being a messenger, isn't it? Basically trying to, as purely as possible, deliver the message that's coming from spirit, rather than me saying, oh, this is what this means. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. Yeah, it does. I'm just reminded of how I remember specific ceremonies where I would have gotten a little entitled with my work with the medicine, and so I would have crossed up my energy somehow, or my body, my mind somehow, with things that probably just weren't healthy for me, like eating really bad food, or being out too late in an environment that wasn't very clean, or whatever, something like that. And then I would go into a ceremony, and being in a more regular flow, you would feel how, like, oh, the medicine has to like kind of polish me and like get rid of some stuff some barnacles or something that I like picked up. And that actually gave me a kind of model for doing astrology, to pay attention to what I'm doing outside of the sessions, because it does seem to impact my ability to clearly transmit or read or pick up on that kind of signal that the reading is trying to present.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's go into how did your friends and family feel about all this? You're going through all of this stuff. You're getting into astrology. You're going through tons of ceremonies in the Amazon. I mean, what was happening with friends and family back home? Were they just on board? Were they, you're crazy, you've lost it?
In terms of family, they saw how sick I'd been physically, and so I don't think they really understood. I mean, I didn't even tell them for a while that I was doing ayahuasca. It was about plant medicines, natural cures. But yeah, I mean, they didn't really understand, I don't think, but they kind of trusted me and knew that I had to do what I had to do. With friends, it's funny, a lot of my old friends just kind of disappeared during this period, because what I was interested in and what I was doing became very different. And so naturally, those friends that weren't of this kind of alternative spiritual kind of mindset just kind of fell away. And so there was a period where I guess I didn't really see that many people. It was a while before suddenly new friends started coming into my life, and like-minded people. But for a long time, I felt quite ashamed, maybe is the right word, of being an astrologer. I didn't want to admit, I didn't really want to tell people. I knew it was right. I knew what it was. I knew it was my thing, but I had a lot of fear about other people's judgments. And so I was kind of in the astrology closet for a while. And
yeah,
it took a long time, and it's kind of been a gradual process of caring less and less, really, what other people think, and just being able to be me. And that's been a very profound process of seeing how it's really reflective of self-judgment, or parts of myself that I don't like, and it's just been, this is me, this is who I am, this is what my life is, and more not being able to do anything else other than live my own truth.
Right. And I think it's interesting that almost every story of a professional astrologer story that I've heard involves a time where you felt so intensely that this is what I'm meant to do. And yet there's also, unlike some other professions in the world where you can be very open about it, and your charisma and excitement, enthusiasm to share or be proud of what you do or whatever it's not really available to astrologers.
Right.
I mean, I don't know one astrologer that hasn't been sort of like in the closet about it at first, or shy or hesitant about, or having to deal with different kinds of social prejudice or whatever. And that, I wonder, I think a lot about the astrologer's dharma, and almost see the stage of the astrologer's life where you feel so compelled by something internally, and yet externally there might be a bit of a facade or a bit of a, like, I can't quite be open about that. And that somehow, maybe, it's sort of tragic, but on the other hand, maybe there's something about that secretive internal space that is common in some ways to spiritual practitioners of all kinds, that there's a kind of social aversion, unless it's sanctified by the holy church or something, to
Right.
to be a spiritual practitioner. There's some element of the thing growing passionately in the secret or something.
Yeah, and I think what's also maybe unique to astrology is, in a way, it's so well known. You've got the horoscopes in all the papers and magazines. And so it's not like maybe doing something else where people don't know what it is. People think they know what astrology is.
Yeah.
And therefore they think it's bollocks.
Right. Right.
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, okay. So going forward in your story, at what point did you sort of say, you know what, I'm going to give this a go and do it professionally?
It was a gradual thing. It was, I think, maybe like everyone else, started out looking at my own chart and friends and families and doing free readings for anyone who was interested. And it was just kind of little by little. I guess there was a point where I was like, I'm just going to start charging for this. And it was Chris, actually, again, because, he was just like, if you want to learn, do readings. And I wanted to, like, Vagoanly perfect my skill in secret before I started to do it. And he was like, the only way you're going to learn is to do them. And so, he kind of gave me a nudge to do that. And I guess it was just kind of a natural progression. I don't know. And
Right.
here I am.
Right. So you kept growing it. And as you have gone back to drink, and you have been studying and practicing and reading more, has the medicine continued to be a source of guidance and inspiration?
In my astrology
Yeah,
or in
yeah.
my life? Yeah. I mean, certainly when I've been there recently, it's been very obviously helping me through my experiences. It's not something I particularly think about or connect with outside of being in the jungle. But, I feel like it's so infused with me now after, so many ceremonies and so much time that, as you probably would understand yourself, it kind of has it's conscious. And so you drink the medicine, you're bringing its consciousness into you, essentially. And so I wouldn't say I'm directly aware of it on a daily basis, but I'm sure it is there informing my astrology and who I am and what I do.
Right. And so now I'd love to well, maybe we'll start winding things down a little bit here. What I'd love to do is like give people some sense of what you're up to today. What are you doing today? And also tell us about the book that came out of all of this.
Okay. Well, let's start with the book. So, yeah, I wrote, and actually, here's another interesting coincidence. It was kind of initiated by your friend Nick.
Oh, okay.
So, Nick's a writer, and I remember years ago when I was quite in my early days of being in the jungle, and Nick was there quite a bit, and I said to him kind of in passing one day, it's like, one day you should, like, I tell you my story, you can write a book about it. And he was like, no, you should write a book about it. And I was like, whatever, I'm not a writer. And then, I don't know, a couple of years after that, I just started writing, almost like journaling, like keeping track of my story. And again, it just kind of little by little over the years, it was over about 5-year period of just writing, and it just started shaping into a book. And I was like, there was no intention initially to publish anything. And then I kind of realized at one point, a lot of my life journey, and certainly with ayahuasca, has been about dealing with fear and facing fear. And it was kind of like the medicine saying to me, okay, you've been learning this lesson, put it into practice. Because there was a lot of fear around putting my story, quite a personal story, out there into the public. And I realized the only reason not to was fear. And I was like, damn, I can't live through fear anymore. It just, every time it comes up, I feel impelled to confront it.
Right.
And so yeah, I published, in a sense, the story's never finished, but something happened through this journey that was a very clear sort of endpoint for this particular part of the story. And so, it kind of naturally formed into a book called Shedding the Layers, How Ayahuasca Saved More Than My Skin. And
it's a great title. I love the title.
Thank you. Yeah, not mine. That was an amalgamation of a couple of friends' ideas on the title. Yeah, and so then it got published, and it's out there in the world.
I will show people where you can get it on Amazon in just a second.
Okay.
When I show them your website as well. It's a fantastic book. And are you writing any more? Do you feel like you'll write more, maybe about astrology?
I've had an idea for quite a few years that I started to put into practice, and I haven't got any further with for about 3 years. But I have this idea of a series of children's astrology books, which I won't go into too much or any detail about, but that's kind of there. It's not really
but that's needed. I've never seen a good children's astrology book.
That's what I thought. And so I feel like I've got a good idea. I just haven't written them yet.
Well, now you put it out there, so you're going to have to get to it so someone doesn't say, hey, that sounds like a good idea. I'm just kidding. Let's see. So what I want to do now is also, and so what do you specialize in? You teach classes, or you offer readings? Tell us a little bit about what kinds of services you offer.
Yeah, so what I really love, my favorite kind of astrology is doing horary astrology, is astrology as divination. So when somebody has a very specific question, very pertinent in their life at that moment, then it's very clear guidance on what's the right thing to do. I don't know if you've heard it described like this, but Jeffrey, he described horary so well to me one time. He was saying that astrology is basically a test of one's desire. It's like, what does my heart really want in this situation?
Mm.
And, he was talking about how desire comes from the Latin desideri, which means from the stars, which is essentially another way of saying divine will. It's like, is this, should I take this job, for example? Is this divine will, which is the same thing as saying, is this what I deeply want? And so, it's an amazing tool I found for having us really be in tune with, in touch with, moving in harmony with what life wants for us, our true heart's desire, which sometimes we're not very clear about. And so, this kind of astrology I find is great for what's the right thing to do. Of course, you then have to do it. Jeffrey sometimes describes horary as kataki, meaning initiative in Greek, I think. And so it shows the symbolism, but we have to act it out. So it will show you what you need to do in the situation to bring out, what's in your best interest, basically. Mm-hmm. So that very specific kind of astrology is a particular favorite of mine. But mostly what I do is general consultations. So it can be looking at birth charts and transits and progressions, what's going on right now. So basically I always like to say about helping people move in harmony with what life wants for them to be on their path. So yeah, general astrology consultations I do. And in terms of teaching, something that I've started really recently, which I'm really excited about, is, what I've kind of come to realize is there's a lot of, there's a huge amount of wonderful astrology courses out there for people to learn astrology, such as your own. But I realize that there's a lot of people who want to know more than just the basics of sun sign astrology, for example. They know a bit, they know it works, but they don't have the time or the interest to study for a year or 2 years. And so I'm creating shorter courses around specific topics. That's, I'm an earth sign. It's all about how can I practically use this in my life and quite quickly. And so, I've just created one on relationship astrology. And so it's kind of pulling out the essential parts of astrology for this particular theme. So somebody's not going to become a professional astrologer by doing the course, but what they can become, what they can find in quite a short space of time, is really useful practical information for understanding themselves in relationship, their partners. And so, what I've got running at the moment, I've sort of created a free sort of taster mini course that people can sign up to on my website, and it'll give them an introduction to me and my work, and some sort of a starter into this particular topic of relationship astrology. And then if they like that and they want to take it deeper, there's a paid course that they can sign up to that's, way more extensive. So I really like this idea. I think there's a big sort of gap in the astrological market for this. I don't think there needs to be another comprehensive course on astrology, but, how can people use astrology practically day to day in their lives without becoming an astrologer? That's what interests me.
That's brilliant. I think that's you're absolutely right. You're onto something there. It says it's like there's nothing between the full immersion and the, and there may be things that are just newspaper columns or something.
Exactly. So, I have a bunch of ideas for a series of these, but in this particular style, there's just this one on relationships so far. I have a couple of other older courses on my website that are sort of overview of, like one on just a basic introduction to all of the different facets of astrology, the planets, the signs, the houses, the aspects, and a short course on going more deeply into the sun and moon. Yeah, but it's, I'm really excited at the moment for these new courses that I'm going to be creating around these particular topics.
Awesome. So people can you can go to mark-flaherty.com, and I will put this in the body of the YouTube text as well, so that people seeing this will find the link in the comment section below the YouTube video. But on Mark Flaherty Astrology, on the courses tab, the free relationship astrology mini course is there. You can sign up for that. You can check out his other courses, and then you can also, it's on his homepage as well. Click here for my free relationship astrology mini course, and you can kind of get to know Mark and the way he teaches and the content and stuff like that. And then that may give you a taste for other things that Mark offers. And then if you go to Mark's reading tab, the reading tab has a horary astrology reading, regular astrological consultation, child's astrology report, personal natal written report. There's like a whole bunch of options here. So locational astrology, electional astrology, best time to do something if you're thinking about where in the world might I be. There's a lot of different options you can check out on this readings page. Anything I'm missing or that you want to highlight here?
No, that's all good, mate.
Okay, cool. And then I want to point everybody one more time to Shedding the Layers, How Ayahuasca Saved More Than My Skin on Amazon. You can search Mark Flaherty or just Shedding the Layers and the keyword ayahuasca. That's how it probably will come up pretty easily there. Mm-hmm. And I've read the book. It's awesome. The artwork on the cover actually comes from, didn't Mimi do it?
Mimi did do it, yeah. Mimi's a good friend of mine, an English lady who was working she's an ayahuasca apprentice. She now is a fully fledged ayahuasca shaman, but she also is an amazing artist. She paints her visions and the artworks from one of her paintings. And actually, if I can give her a quick plug, she's currently raising money for her new ayahuasca center, and all of her original artwork of her ayahuasca visions are currently on sale at a discounted price.
Oh, where can we find that? I'll pull it up right here.
Her website's called sacredtreeessences.com.
See if it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's Mimi. Gosh, it's been a while since I've gotten to see her. She's awesome. And where can I find the artwork here?
I don't know. Scroll down. Is it on there?
Here's with Mimi's visionary artwork. Yeah. Here's the paintings. Yeah, these are this is amazing painting work that she's done. You can check it out. And these are, I mean, I see these and it brings me back into the medicine space. It's pretty incredible. So they're
so you beautiful. Can buy prints of her work, but you can also buy what I would consider a ridiculously cheap price right now, her original paintings.
Yeah, there it is. You can see them at the bottom here. The portfolios at the bottom. It's really, really cool. Well, that she did the artwork for your book, Shedding the Layers, and you can find her at, this one is her first and last name, but I'll just take you back to her main page and you can find it from there, which is sacredtreeessences.com. And then at the bottom is the visionary artwork that she's done, that she did for the cover of your book. And she was in the first ceremony I ever drank in, and was, apprenticing at that point. Well, almost kind of starting her apprenticeship, and
right.
Very, very cool. This is bringing back a lot of memories, and this has been really, really cool to talk to you today. And I hope that what comes of this is that people listening out there who are students of astrology, who are interested in astrology, that we're representing the stories of astrologers, and what a unique journey it is to be called to this fascinating starry language. We all have stories, of course, and they're all different and sacred in their own right. And hopefully this series goes some distance to helping also sort of normalize the story of astrologers. I mean, they're not normal, but they're common, like they're commonalities that we all share. And I think one of the themes that stands out, and not just astrology, but many different sacred traditions, is that there is often a dark night of the soul that comes with learning to do, hold space for someone or be any kind of healing practitioner or what have you. And that's certainly part of what I feel like we learned today. Would you say that that's accurate, Mark?
Yeah, that's definitely how it goes.
Right on. Oh, let me switch back. And so let's see here. I'll turn this off. I'm not actually sure. Oh, here we go. There we go. So thanks again for being here, Mark. And we'll make sure that this will go out to all of my people, but I'll make sure I give you a link too. And then that way you can promote it with your audience as well. And hopefully this will be a fun way of sharing your story.
Yeah, well, thank you, Adam, for doing this series, for this chat today. I mean, I just love talking about astrology to anyone who will listen. I'm sure
Right.
But no, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this with me. And on a personal level, it's just really nice to chat with you. We haven't spoken for many years. And
Right.
so really nice we've shared messages, but it's nice to be in verbal, visual contact again.
Absolutely. Well, we will hopefully do it again and have more ways of connecting soon. So thank you everybody for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode, which hopefully will be later this month or early next. So take care, everyone. Bye.